That's really fundamentally, I think, is the core practical Christianity. It's not something that's, all right, it's going to be something I have to work towards when I die, or I'm trying to appease something out there that's going to give me some gifts or blessing. But this is a practical daily application of what I'm learning. And it's going to work practically in my life if I'm applying it. And so one thing I definitely don't want to do is create a ministry where there's judgment and shame.
Right.
We don't really need that in the world anymore. But we can have a ministry that's built on authenticity. If I say I believe this, I'm going to live it, or I'm going to strive towards living it. I'm at least going to be making the effort towards living that. It's not about, well, I saw you eat that, or caught you smoking, I caught you drinking, you weren't supposed to be out that late, you're supposed to get your kids to school. It's really about lifting each other up and saying, how can I support you in living an authentic life?
Welcome to the Spiritual Forum, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to give a shout out to my retreat again. If you are interested in creating a world that works for all beings on the planet, that's what this retreat is about. It is about the whole planet, and we are meeting October the 17th to the 20th at Unity Village, and there's also a virtual attendance option. And so please learn more about it at thespiritualforum.org/retreat. I have had podcast listeners in the past attend this retreat just because they hear it about it from this podcast. So I hope you come and join us. It is such an interesting intersection of people that's very supportive, and who doesn't want to co-create a world that works for all on this planet? Let me introduce my guest now. Speaking of unity, Reverend Shad Groverland is an ordained Unity minister, and he is the former president and CEO of Unity Worldwide Ministries. And Unity Worldwide Ministries is the development, education, and support organization for all Unity ministers and ministries and leaders. He is currently in the process of launching a new church based on the principles of practical Christianity, which we will be speaking about soon. Shad is also one of the speakers at the October retreat, and I'm going to let him fill in all of the blanks. Welcome, Shad.
Well, that's a big task. Thank you. It's great to be here. And I can attest to meeting some of your podcast listeners at the retreat and getting to integrate with this wonderful eclectic group of people and having such really incredible conversations, because it's not like there's one type of person there. There really is this beautiful, diverse group of people with shared interests. So you get to kind of go, what do, and how did you come to this? And it's really a fascinating process.
It really is. There is a real range of people who come. And I think the one thing that people have in common is we're all kind of on the spiritual path, for one thing, although we have atheists too. So anybody's
Which
welcome.
is a spiritual path.
It is its own spiritual path, that's for sure. And you have spoken at each one of the retreats. We're in our fourth year. I think you were most involved probably in the first one, and I think the second one you engaged a lot. Last year, I think that you were kind of in and out because you had other vacation plans or whatnot. But this year, we have you on the schedule to talk to us a little bit longer. Actually, by popular demand, we've had some requests for you to speak a little longer and share what you know and what you're up to. So pretty excited about that.
It seems like the longer I speak, the more trouble I get in.
That is true. That is true. But now that you're out of this leadership position at Unity Worldwide Ministries, you probably have more freedom to speak exactly what's on your heart. And that's a nice feeling.
It is, yeah. And I think my filter wears thinner and thinner the longer I speak. After 5 minutes, it's kind of wearing away. And then 20 minutes, it's just, almost all in filter.
Oh, so, good. Well, we've got you on for 45 minutes, so who knows what you're going to say at the end.
Try to be from the heart, and that's the most important thing.
That is the most important thing. So let's fill in the blanks about your spiritual path. You grew up in Unity. A lot of people who listen to my podcast, even though I'm a Unity minister, they may not know about some of the Unity teachings specifically, but most people find Unity after they've been involved in some other core religion or spiritual tradition. I know at my church, I had a lot of people who were in Judaism. I had a lot of former Catholics and a lot of just seekers and searchers, but very few people actually grow up in unity as you did. So why don't you share your story about how that all was for you and how you got into ministry, and then we'll get into what you're doing now.
Sure. So my father's a unity minister. My mother ministers with him. And so I was born right into it in his first ministry in San Angelo, Texas. And growing up in unity, I mean, really is growing up in a bubble. It's like anything else you grow up in. You just sort of assume this is how the world works until you're old enough to go to public school. And my mom homeschooled all three of my siblings, myself and my two siblings, all three of us. But me until sixth grade, and then seventh grade, I went into junior high. And that's when you sort of are, exposed to the rest of the world. It's like, oh, not everyone goes to unity. Not everyone believes that we're all interconnected and that God's, moving in and through and as us, and that all life is sacred and we should have an honor and respect for all life, and that I can heal my own body with my own mind, and my health is my responsibility, not someone else's responsibility. And all these things where you realize, and my parents, brilliantly, I think, they tried to prepare us ahead of time for the world. Early on, they would say things like, look, we're giving you something that most people don't get. And that's great, but it's also going to push you to the outskirts of the way the world thinks. And you're going to be thinking differently, and you're sometimes going to be chastised for it. But recognize that that's an absolute blessing, because it's honoring that you have this, you've been gifted this tool that other people have not been gifted, which are these teachings of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, which are so primarily based in healing of the mind, healing of the body, healing of the soul. Well, with the power for us to do it ourselves and to facilitate that in other people. So it's a real shift in responsibility in your relationship to God and Holy Spirit and Christ and all these things, that I have a role in this, an active role in this. If you really want to get to the core of unity, is I have a responsibility and active role in my own spiritual development, my growth, my health, the way I show up in the world. There's not outside forces dictating how I'm going to be. Now, of course, we run into outside circumstances that can be challenging, but it's really, how do I show up and respond to these circumstances? That's where we spend the bulk of this practice. So I grew up in unity, and I went through all the way through high school, part of the youth programs, going to camps and everything. And it was just this amazing experience that you'd almost say, I don't want to go to the real world. Mm-hmm. We'd be with the unity youth groups, and I remember in our youth group, we'd say, I don't want to go back to school where no one else seems to get it. No one else seems to be talking about these things. And I love the support we have here, but you do eventually graduate and you go off to college, and now you're really in the world. You're no longer sheltered by the concept of your parents. And pretty much from the get-go, I couldn't help but preach to everyone around me. And not that I was telling them how to think, but they would just say, well, what are you doing? You're like, you don't seem to go get checkups at the doctor. You kind of have your own little bucket of salves and ointments and things your mom's created or you've brought with you or you've found at a health food store. Like, what are you doing? And I'd say, oh, well, I'll do this, and then talk about unity. And they were always sort of fascinated in how I just looked at the world differently. And I was really taking care of myself. If things got difficult, I reach out to my mom, who's kind of the doctor of the family and a holistic practitioner, and say, oh, well, here, I'll send you something, or pray on that, or work with an affirmation, just to have that resource. But even through my work career, people would just sort of weigh ideas off of me, or they'd slide their chair up and ask me, like, hey, I'm having this relationship problem. Like, what do you think? What's your perspective on this? And because the tools I was sharing, and they're not mine, it's just simply passing on these wonderful tools that Spirit had given to us, would work. Fundamentally, they would work. It would help people heal their body. It would help them heal their relationship. It would help them have a better workplace environment. And they would and so people started saying, like, oh, I can't wait to come to your church someday. And I'm like, not a church someday. Like, I'm not going to be a minister like my dad was. And it's just sort of unavoidable. But so I was in my early 30s and had a skiing accident, and sort of had my calling to ministry at that point. Went to seminary, got ordained, and away I went with my first ministry in Las Vegas, then joined my family in Boulder, Colorado to minister with them before becoming the CEO of Unity Worldwide Ministries. That's the abridged version. I did a lot in the first quarter and then very little in the last 3 quarters.
That's okay. The first quarter is very, very interesting. And I think what you're describing is this term we call practical Christianity, which is really putting into practice the teachings. The Fillmores were the founders of Unity, and they were putting into practice the teachings of Jesus, and so the healing practices of Jesus, and that we are powerful beings, which I think is often lost or completely lost in traditional Christianity. So I completely get this being in a bubble and then having to go out in the world and to be that interface. It is so uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable no matter really what your message is, if the majority viewpoint, the majority worldview is so different. And yet, that is what the spiritual path really it places us. God's universe, source, energy, whatever, places us in that situation over and over again. And I've always kind of viewed it as being like a bridge, like we're a bridge between one set of teachings or principles and the outer world, or I shouldn't say the outer world, the reality of the paradigms that are there. And yet we have to go and be that interface in order to impact consciousness at all. Otherwise, we can just sit in our own room, our own cave, and raise in consciousness, and here we are feeling all peaceful and good. And I suppose that impacts the world as well. But having to go out into the world and share who you are is challenging. It's a blessing and kind of a challenge.
Yeah, it was a really profound moment for me was when my daughter was born, my daughter Anna. It was that moment where I realized, gosh, I had this amazing upbringing. And I was given this set of tools that has just felt like it fast forwarded me through growth into college and all these things, and gave me a way of living that made life just easier and more enjoyable and recognizable to others, that they want to support me and helping me thrive and grow in things I was doing. And I want her to have these same set of tools, because I was kind of off in my own thing in my 20s. You go to college and you get your first job and you get a girlfriend and you get married, and I'm not really thinking about religion, not really thinking about unity at that time. It's just kind of who I am. But her coming into the world was really a profound moment of got to make sure she gets what I got, because this has been such a step forward for me in life and consciousness and being. And I kind of knew early on that kids tend to not to listen to their parents. Like, I can't just sit there and say, all right, I'm going to download into you what I learned. She was, from the get-go, someone that would listen to pretty much anyone but me, no matter what the topic, the sport, the activity was. So so we did find a unity, when she was old enough to really go and understand, and to get her into the youth program and learn these principles, and then to watch her little mind just come up with little questions that she would ask me, or I'd hear her just thinking about, or something she would say. And I was like, yes, she's getting it. She's getting the same thing. It's so awesome to see a generation get that.
Yes, yes. Well, and it is empowering, and it is really about self-responsibility. And we live in a world that's not really interested so much in self-responsibility. Overall, there's a lot of victim consciousness in the world. There always has been. And yet it is rising. The idea that we are 100% responsible for ourselves just holds us accountable on our path. I think one of the biggest challenges, though, is this thing about healing the body, and how we've been so indoctrinating into grabbing the pill or taking the syrup or the injection or the whatever, going to the doctor and say, I don't have time for this. I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I don't have time for this. I need to get this fixed so I can get back to work. And
Right.
and that's so different than how you were raised when illness arose in your body. Can you share some stories about that?
There's a litany of them. I mean, even when I had my call to ministry, I really had a big skiing accident. It shattered the heel bone in my foot. On the first day I took my daughter skiing, she's in ski school. I take this jump. So I'm Now I'm in ski patrol. They can't get my boot on. It's a whole thing. And she's still in ski school. But anyway, in that moment, I mean, I had to go to the hospital because I couldn't get my
Sure.
ski boot off. And it's a whole thing. And going to the hospital. But as soon as I got x-rays and got out, it was a call to my mother. And we networked in my brother and my dad. And the family kind of jumps in. I'm like, all right, am I going to get surgery on this thing or not? I mean, that's really, it was the question. Like, I've been showed my heel bone is shattered. And there's kind of, we're all weighing in like, all right, well, yeah, you get the power of mind, but you don't want to have it heal in a weird way. And there's sort of limited, we're still human. Not all of us have evolved to have perfect power of mind. And so, but it was like this process of we're going to weigh in on what's the next step. And so we chose that, yes, I'm going to have surgery on it. I'm going to have it mend back together, but I'm also going to do the best I can not to take pain medication or anything else I would have to take in that process to limit the amount of exposure I have to a system that I fundamentally am trying not to fall into. And so I did, and it healed very quickly. It healed amazingly well and blew the doctor away and everything else, but, kind of worked in tandem. And I told him up front, I am not your average patient. So I'm looking for a form of excellence in what you do, but the bare minimum of what you have to do something great. But I mean, that was one scenario. But I remember I told the story at the first retreat we had and got some flack for that, but I'll tell it again now. But I actually got a really bad flu. I was probably 12 years old. And the amazing thing about my mother, I mean, once you're a parent and your child gets injured or is sick, do you realize how much faith it takes to just sit with that and work on it and not rush them off to the hospital? It takes so much faith and so much willpower. And I think back, like I was really sick. I mean, I was really sick. And she was just working with me and she would do the hot packs and all sorts of stuff that we did in our family. And it got to a point that I was so ill, she finally took me to a homeopathic doctor in town just to say, can you make sure he's not about to die so I could keep working on him? And he said, yeah, it looks like he has scarlet fever. It's pretty serious, but take him home, put him into a freezing cold shower. And in that shower, put in a bunch of blankets and a comforter, get it soaking wet or cold water, and then put them in bed and wrap them in those blankets, just as tight as you can, as thick as you can, in these sopping wet, freezing cold blankets. And I'm sure you'd probably go in prison for trying to do this today to your child, but my mom did it, and it just forces your body to go into this hyper overheating to compensate for the cold, to just burn up anything that's going on inside your body. And that's what kicked it. And that got me over the edge coming out of that. And I finally was able to finish the healing process. But just think back on that, I was like, for my mom to say, okay, I'm going to throw my horribly sick child in this freezing cold shower or wrap him in cold sheets and throw him in bed and he's going to burn it out. We'll all be fine. Now, it's just incredible amount of faith, but that's what the Fillmores instilled in my parents was. It wasn't a fear around it. It was, all right, well, let me just see if there's some other tools out there that are going to help you do this without having a diagnosis or this is going to happen, or he might have brain damage because of this. Just like, hey, go do this, give it a shot. It's going to break the fever. He'll be fine. So that's stories like that with my brothers and sisters all throughout our childhood. And I don't want to make it a fantasy scenario. Like if one of us broke something, we went and got it set. It wasn't like my mom, tied twigs around it. It's like if it was a real emergency situation, we'd go and get it set and utilize the doctors for what they're really amazing at doing, but not overly depend on it.
Yeah, I do think it's worth making a distinction here about this is not like anti-doctors, not anti-allopathic medicine, but it is about knowing that our bodies have some divine design and that our bodies are equipped to heal, and that we tend to circumvent that. And when we circumvent that with all sorts of external modalities, that often can set us back in another way. And our bodies are designed to be whole and to heal. And so you've referred to the Fillmores a couple of times. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were the co-founders of Unity. And Unity really was founded based on spiritual healing and Myrtle Fillmore's experience of healing. I've told that story a couple times on my podcast, 2 or 3 times, but perhaps you can really tell that story about Myrtle and in a new way for people to hear.
Okay. So she was, raised with a often very sick child, but not just being physically sick. She had a family that constantly reminded her that she's sick, and they would refer to her as the sickly one. Can you imagine growing up like, "Hey, I'm the sickly one.
Right.
Welcome to this reunion." And that was the mentality that she's in, and it's not so different than the way a lot of people are raised. Like, oh, you have inherited this sickness. You're just going to have this sickness. It's just part of who you are. Deal with it. So she was raised with that mentality, and she had tuberculosis, and it was becoming increasingly a crippling thing. And she had met her husband, Charles, and they were starting to really question the systems of society and the idea that you will have to inherit a disease. It won't go away. You're stuck with it the rest of your life, and only a doctor can heal it. And she'd been to doctor after doctor after doctor, and it wasn't getting better. And her husband, Charles, had a very similar scenario where he had a ice skating accident, injured his hip, got infected. Same thing, surgery, doctor after doctor after doctor. They couldn't heal it. So they both were kind of on this journey of looking for an alternative healing modality. And they went to a lecture by Dr. E.B. Weeks, who was a New Thought practitioner, New Thought teacher. It's another term we're introducing here, New Thought, which is kind of the basis of the theology the Fillmores came out of, was the power of the mind over the body and how it integrates with the power of God's consciousness. But they were exposed now, and he said in that lecture, an affirmation, I'm a child of God, I do not inherit disease, or I do not inherit sickness. And it really struck Myrtle that this was not something that she had to be stuck with, that it was not inherited, it was not inherent to her being, that she's a child of God, and ergo a child of God is designed to be perfect. That doesn't necessarily mean perfect in outward appearance. It's perfect as in the wholeness of the being of who she is, and the body can reflect that wholeness. So she started working with that affirmation, and not like over a weekend. I know a lot of people think like, oh, Myrtle got this affirmation, she knocked it out in a weekend, then she was off playing volleyball.
That'd
She
be
worked
nice.
for 2 years. Yes. But she worked for 2 years with this affirmation, and she would often put, as the story goes, an empty chair next to her in her room, and she would visualize Jesus Christ sitting in that chair to be with her for this healing process and have a conversation with Jesus. And so, she was working on this so much that her husband's mother had to really take on a lot of the responsibilities of watching her kids, because she spent so many hours of the day working on this healing. She was so dedicated. And long story short, she did. She healed herself of tuberculosis, and she got her life back, and she got to enjoy living again. And so that's the pinnacle point where unity begins, because now her husband, Charles, is kind of like, whoa, that truly worked. And he started working on his hip and his leg, and that they started telling their friends about it, giving them healing techniques and helping them heal. And also now they're publishing magazines for people and booklets, and it just grew from there.
Yeah, Charles was kind of a scientist in a way, in that he would observe, test and observe, and then kind of believe from there. And I think that's what we ask people to do in unity. I could spend a lot of time on spiritual healing. I would love to, but I also want to pivot to other teachings and practical Christianity. And you mentioned early on the teaching that all life is sacred, and that was an original, or I should say, early unity teaching that I believe most of humanity has pulled away from. But I really feel like we're being called back to that in some way, to really recognize what is our place as human beings on this planet in relationship to all of the rest of creation, and what was the original intention, and where are we heading now, and what can we do as self-actualized, responsible people to restore ourselves.
And the interesting thing is, I don't think we've moved away from saying all life is sacred, but how we integrate ourselves into that statement has changed. And to really say, when I say all life is sacred, I insert myself into that as a day-to-day experience, not just conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just coming up for me. I remember in junior high, I had to do a diorama for whatever thing, with the cardboard and the little pictures on it. I did it on Native Americans, because that's part of my lineage. And I talked about, how they honored and revered animals and everything else, and they'd pray over a kill and everything they did. And And the panel kind of came around and they were judging each little kid sitting there in front of the thing. I remember this adult came by, he's got a clipboard. He said, we talk about, they revered animals, but they still ate them. How do you justify that? And my answer, here I was, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, I said, they were still part of the food chain. They had not removed themselves from the food chain. They were getting eaten by animals too. They were part of a system where that existed. They were not part of the system where they were fencing animals and curtailing their livelihood. They were a part of the system where animals ate animals, and so it was more of a fair system at that time. Whether that's true today or not, that was my response. And so this idea of how do we integrate ourselves into this concept of all life is sacred? I can say that, but am I living that when I wake up in the morning and when I'm having breakfast and when I'm integrating with an ant outside on the sidewalk or a spider I find on the lamp in my living room? Or am I really living that on a day-to-day basis?
I think that's really interesting. I think so much of our spirituality, no matter what our religious background is, can be very, very conceptual. And I think it is something to really ask ourselves, what would that look like? What does all life is sacred look like? I really like your answer about your diorama, because I hadn't really thought through that. I have been with many people who are spiritual keynote speakers or whatever, and they will bring up the Native Americans and how, of course we are meant to eat meat because the Native Americans, look what they did and they could make it sacred. But then it's like, okay, what does it have to do with anything that's going on today and with you and me? It's like pointing to some other culture and some other time. And it really is completely out of the realm of the world that we live in. And so it's really kind of an unfair comparison. But I do think that what you said makes a lot of sense, that they were inserted. They were nature. We have pulled ourselves away from nature and we're kind of looking at it and using it. And so the Fillmores they awakened in some way to this, which I think is very interesting. And I think a lot of people think that Jesus also had this consciousness. I think that's a controversial topic these days,
Mhm.
but it's hard for me to believe that the Christ consciousness wouldn't also be completely inserted in all of nature and also recognize that all life is sacred. But would you share with us what the Fillmore teachings were? And I'm I'm not asking this out of ignorance because this is one of my babies, but
It's like, don't you know?
I
But
do
I'm
know.
happy to.
I do know. I have my little booklet here.
Hey, I want you to send me some of those for my new church, by the way. I want to buy
I
some
will.
of those from
I'll send you a
So,
bunch. I'll send you a
that's
bunch.
a
And
side note.
yeah, well, I'll talk about that in a minute, but why don't you just share a little bit to be another voice?
Yeah, well, I was raised in the Fillmore teachings, but growing up, you don't necessarily dive into the history of things like, I want to see when this happened, what date, and how that came about. And so we were mostly vegetarian growing up, but when I actually got into seminary and I started reading the history of these two incredible people, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, and how it came about, and that they were really called out by one of their employees. They're building this organization they called Unity based on these teachings of practical Christianity. And this is really early on. They're doing their publishing, and they have one of their employees as a Seventh-day Adventist. So they didn't force everyone to be Unity that was working with them. And they invite him to dinner, and he comes over to dinner. If you know, the Seventh-day Adventists are a vegetarian or vegan by and large. And so he doesn't eat meat. And here they sit down to dinner, and what comes to the table? It's like a pork roast or something like that. And he's just shocked. And it's so amazing. I love to just put myself in a moment in time
Yeah.
to travel just sort of back time and to be in that room with them and to really see here he's been with these two beautiful individuals working with them, and they're probably role models to him in a way with this incredible philosophy. And people are gathering around this idea that we respect all life and we're integrated with all life, and everything we do impacts every other aspect of life. And this message they've got is just so inclusive of all beings and all creatures. And then he sits down and there's a dead animal on the plate in front of him. And in the way I see it, like the story, see the story is he kind of comes unhinged, and he really, as it's written, he sort of does. He says, basically calls them out as hypocrites. How could you teach this message you're teaching and then be harming these beautifully innocent beings who can't really fight back, who can't speak for themselves? If you really think you're into oneness and you really respect all life, how could you be doing this? And he just calls them to task. And that's a shock for them. I mean, I really feel reading that, and where you kind of grow your empathy, I really feel just the pain they felt or the shock they felt in that moment to be called out. Because it wasn't like, let's just gradually get into this. He's just like, boom, you hypocrites. And that's powerful for them. And that is an instantaneous shift in their lives. From like that moment on, they stop eating what they were referring to as flesh. They would start talking about eating of flesh, which would be eating of meat, eating animals for food. And they started integrating that into the unity teachings and writing that into the unity theology and doctrine, that we don't do this, we don't eat these animals for food. But just the moment of sitting down and having this young, beautiful man just call them to task and say, where's your integrity to teach us this, but not be practicing it yourself? Is this a real shift in the organization that we don't talk about, I think, as often as it would really deserves, for how giant of a shift that was, to the point where they're starting to print vegan Bibles, maybe the first vegan Bibles ever that weren't bound in leather. They're opening up a vegan or a vegetarian restaurant in Kansas City, possibly one of the first vegetarian restaurants in the United States. And not only that, they have a Rolls-Royce limousine that they're driving around Kansas City, picking up business people to come eat at this vegetarian restaurant. I'm just like, they're so forward thinking in what they're doing and making possibly the first veggie dogs. It's like,
yeah,
so ahead of their time in what they were doing. But it's not something we necessarily talk about that much.
Yeah, I think that incident, the employee's name, I think it was Harry Church. And I think he was like, what are all these dead things doing on the table? And I think about that and I go, I have never been that bold. And I wish I could be that bold. It is something that I know I have in me, but I think I'm not ready to hear the stuff that comes back. The Fillmores, though, were very high consciousness, enough to be able to hold that tension and not defend, but actually see something about themselves. And I think that takes a very high level of consciousness. All of us are missing something. I mean, all of us have some blind spots. I know I have lots of blind spots. I don't know what they are because I'm blind to them, but I have come to a place in my own evolution that I want to see them. So I ask to see them. But the typical human response is defend. What do you mean I'm a hypocrite? Look at you, or something like that. And they didn't do that. So in that whole story, I see how amazing Harry Church was to be so bold, to stand in what he saw as hypocritical behavior. The other guy I know who did that was Jesus, who was constantly calling out the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the priests and whatnot for preaching one thing and doing something else. And the spiritual path really is all about alignment, to align your thoughts, your beliefs, your speaking with your behaviors, and to find that alignment, because that's where that peace is. That's where that peace that passes all understanding is. That's where divine harmony is. So I really admire Harry for his boldness, and I really admire the Fillmores for not defending, but actually being able to reflect and see something about themselves and then take action. They didn't require anybody in unity to become non-flesh eaters. They didn't demand that of anybody, but they did teach it. Charles taught very clearly that not only is this something that we want to refrain from, to be in harmony with all that is, but that it is completely connected with our ability to experience and to create universal love and world peace and all of the things that we say we're about. Like, how can we be loving if how can we say we are love if we're not acting in a loving way towards these beings? How can we want world peace if we're actually exploiting and dominating and being warlike towards these beings? So he connected that, and he spoke very fervently about it. And so I'm thinking like, whoa, I'm always having to reflect on myself. What will it take in me to be that bold, and what will it take in me to be that receptive to the blind spots? And I think that's what I would ask everybody who's listening to consider for themselves.
Well, I would imagine, I mean, he probably didn't do that to everyone he saw walking down the street with a hot dog. I imagine
Yeah,
he probably had a relationship with them enough
yeah,
to where he knew their consciousness,
yeah,
he knew their heart, and he knew there was an appropriate place to do that.
yeah,
And it's like you and I, like you could call me out on something, and I'd be like,
yeah,
"All right, you got me.
yeah.
Let me
That's true.
sit with that." And there's you build to relationship. You can do that. And I do call people out, like my friends. I'll call them right out, and we'll laugh about it. And we'll debate back and forth, and we'll have an exchange. And when you've built that relationship, you can step into that space. But then we see sort of the angry vegan stereotype of people stepping into that space, or people they don't know, they've never met, and they just become offensive, and it's
Right.
working against the cause. And so with the Fillmore Church that we're starting here in Lee Summit, our goal is to continue that honoring what they were doing at that time. There's not a shame, there's not a judgment of how you eat. That decision is between you and God. But we're going to talk about these principles. We're going to talk about why they were eating that way. We're going to talk about how they came to that. We're going to talk about the benefits you could experience in your life, benefits I've experienced in my life, the benefits my wife has experienced, the different people in this community have experienced. Just like if you're praying every day, there's benefits. If you're meditating every day, there's benefits. If you're eating differently, there's benefits. There's all these things that we can aspire and work towards, that we don't have to shame people for not being there. Because like you said, like we've all got our blind spots. I've got blind spots. I'm still working on stuff. I'm not perfect. So we just add this to our quiver of tools to help us grow and expand and evolve and support each other instead of trying to step up on each other to get higher up. Let's
Hmm.
lift each other up through this process and say, hey, here's what's possible. Here's a world we can create. And it's not that anyone is there yet that we have to shame each other. It's just that here's the potential. If it's working, let's work it. Try it out for yourself and see if it works.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned this before. It's like pointing to an ideal. Like none of us are there, but there
Mhm.
is an ideal that we could be on the path to. We may be starting at different places, but let's set the bar here, whether it's about spiritual healing or how we eat or how we treat each other, how we are in service, all the different ways that we can be in the world as as people who fundamentally believe in the oneness of all that is. So, in your ministry, are you going to be teaching in a way that holds people accountable? And I don't mean that in a "what did you do last week" way, but what I found when I was leading church, and I did for 10 years, and I was in churches for 10 or 15 years before that, and what I found is everybody kind of comes together on Sunday, and we all feel good, and we need to feel good, and we need to
Mhm.
embrace each other and feel that love, and then people tend to go out in the world and kind of go back to being themselves, and kind of bitching at people on the highway, and whatever
Mhm.
whatever it is, feeling victimized by our boss or upset about politics, whatever it is, all that grousing. Then we come together on Sunday and we sing and we feel good, and there's a place for that. But I think the church that can call us to be on the path of aligning our behavior with our thoughts and our words, and living the life, which is, I believe, what Jesus was challenging people to do, to try to
Right.
understand him and then live the life, even though many Christian denominations would say it's really just about believing in him. I always said, he said, follow me more than anything. Follow me, follow me, follow me. So watch what I'm
Mhm.
doing, walk in my
Mhm.
steps. And that is kind of that accountability. But I would love to see a church that can kind of find that balance and help people really evolve in their consciousness.
Yeah, and that's really fundamentally, I think, is the core practical Christianity. It's not something that's all right. It's going to be something I have to work towards when I die, or I'm trying to appease something out there that's going to give me some gifts or blessing. But this is a practical daily application of what I'm learning. And it's going to work practically in my life if I'm applying it. And so one thing I definitely don't want to do is create a ministry where there's judgment and shame. We
Right.
don't really need that in the world anymore. But we can have a ministry that's built on authenticity. If I say I believe this, I'm going to live it, or I'm going to strive towards living it. I'm at least going to be making the effort towards living that. And that's what we're going to celebrate and honor in Fillmore Church. So we're going to support lifting each other up. It's not about, oh, I saw you eat that, or oh, you caught you smoking, I caught you drinking, you weren't supposed to be out that late, you're supposed to get your kids to school. It's really about lifting each other up and saying, how can I support you in living an authentic life? And that's where we get to Jesus as the way shower, just really the example of what we can do. None of us is there yet. If I walk on water, then let me know, but I haven't yet. We're striving to do these amazing things that this beautiful individual said, greater works you can do than I have done. But so much of it was about faith and integrity. You've got to be doing this practice. Like you said, show makeup on Sunday, singing a joy song, like falling asleep during a sermon and then going home Sunday evening is not cutting it. There's a space for feeling good and having that praise and that worship and that joy and that experiencing a community around you and building that energy up, and then continuing it throughout the week where we support each other through classes and group works and phone trees and text trees to keep saying, no, don't forget, keep it going, show up differently Monday, show up differently Tuesday, show up differently Wednesday. So people go, wow, what do you have going on? I mean, you are growing and evolving. You're a different person. And so that you're these emissaries, you're these examples of what's possible, instead of saying, oh, you should come to this church because we're the best, or you should do, it's really just saying, look, it's working for me. If you want to find something that works for you, come check out what I'm doing. That's where it's happening.
Yeah, I think when I was leading church, one of my favorite things I would do once a month is I would have a pass the mic session, and which a lot of ministers don't like to do because you kind of lose control. But I loved it because it was passing my. How has your life changed? It's not like witnessing so much, but just like share how your life has changed, and that was really, really powerful for people to see how people put these tools in practice, how their life can change. And you're talking about authenticity. Where I am with authenticity is just be authentic. So if you can't align your behaviors with this beliefs, maybe you don't believe that. Maybe it's just a matter of not espousing that belief and espousing the belief that is in line with your behavior. And there's something about just finding your own alignment versus kind of faking it, finding a belief that you feels good and is what you want to do, but you're not willing to do any of the work to align it. That's inauthentic. It's more authentic to just say, you know what, I don't believe any of that stuff over there. I believe this over here, and I'm going to live this life. It's like, okay, you do you, I'll do me.
Well, the two things came to mind. I have a talk, or I have the whole congregation just repeat after me. I'm a hypocrite. It's like, let's just own it. We're all hypocrites.
Right.
I'm like, I'm a unity minister doing my absolute best, but I still say things I'm not fully doing. I'm a hypocrite. Let's just all try to be a little bit less of a hypocrite and own what we are doing. I remember when I was a young kid, I went to this juggling group that was performing in town. They were just like crazy, awesome environmentalists. None of them drove cars. They all rode bikes, whole things. But they sell these bumper stickers that said, I'm polluting the atmosphere. It's like, just own what you're doing. If you're driving a car, you're polluting the atmosphere, just own up to it. So it really is that. It's just say, I've had people call me out like, well, you still take vitamins. I'm like, yeah, I still take vitamins. And it'd be great if someday I could evolve past taking vitamins. And I still have injuries. I still wake up with aches and pains. And I'm still a human being. And we're working on this. We're all working on it. So instead of trying to push each other down on all of our little nitpicking, let's raise each other up and say, yeah, can you help me with my affirmation? Or can you call me out when I'm talking negative and getting down, and lift me up instead of pushing me down further?
Yeah, and to have partners that are willing to call you out and that you're willing to accept that. And again, like not in a judgment way, but in a, we're in this together. I'm trying to grow, you're trying to grow, and I can't see all the times. Or I slip into it. Oh my gosh, I slip into it all the time. You slip into what the material world is pulling me out to say or do or think, and being reactive or feeling like, oh, that happened to me. And to have a partner or a person or a community that's it feels very, very, I guess the word safe would be one word, but just
Mhm.
loving, I guess, would be another word, supportive, that can help us say, you know what, I just noticed that you kind of went on the material path right now. Oh yeah, I am on the material path right now. And maybe I want to stay there for a little longer.
Right. Yeah, it can be nice once in a while.
Right, right. Let me just go play over here in this little sandbox, and now I'm coming back. Well, let me play over in this victim sandbox for a while. Okay, now I'm finished. I'm coming back on the path. Thanks for noticing and supporting me.
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I are just complete minimalists. We just have a few things. We try to have minimalist everything. We go stay in a nice, big, fancy hotel. You're like, ah, yes, the gluttony feels so good for a little while. Then we'll go back to our small lives. Because you talk about, I think it's just being honest that this stuff isn't always easy. It can be exhausting
Yeah,
being on the outskirts of society all the time. Like, you're vegan, you're gluten free, you're an environmentalist, you're trying to ride your bike more, you're trying not to, step on other people. All these things, like you don't listen to the news, you're not buying into the latest trends, you don't know what's going on in fashion because you don't care. It's like all these little things pile up as microaggressions where society is pushing you out to the outskirts over and over again. And sometimes you just go, I just need to take a break
yeah,
because it can be exhausting pushing against this wave all the time. That's why I think a church community, a spiritual community is so important to be able to go in and be among people that agree with you. Yeah, okay. I don't have to justify myself. I don't have to look like a crazy person talking about what I believe. I can just be me for a while here. And we can support each other. And I have people I can reach out to that get it.
yeah,
They get where I am.
yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about in the Gospels how Jesus had to come apart for a while. He had to come away
Mhm.
from all the crowds, and I'm thinking that probably wasn't just to replenish, and probably wasn't just to pray. It was probably at some level also exhausting, being that interface of
Mhm.
the divine and the Christ spirit and the materiality of the world, and what it all is. And so it is something that coming apart, because it's exhausting. And for you, coming apart might have been the hotel room.
Yeah, and I've always been compiling a talk of every time that Jesus admonished his disciples for not getting it. It's just
Yeah,
like it's so many times he's like, "Oh, come on, guys.
I know.
All right, do you not get this thing?" Yeah, they're
You
like,
don't get it.
"Hey,
Yeah.
blah 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 blah," and he's like, "No, not even
Yeah,
close."
you're missing it. Do you watch The Chosen? Have you seen that series, The Chosen?
Yeah, I've been watching it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
In season 4, there's a lot of that. It's like it's like when the two guys come up and say, "We want to sit on your right and left hand," in heaven, in the afterlife, and he's like, oh, he gets mad. He's like, "Oh my gosh, you really don't get it after all this time." And
Right.
Judas is doing his scheming. I love that series because it just really makes it like, oh, the actual scriptures are so kind of flat. There's no personality to them. There's no backstory. There's no connecting conversations, and so that series kind of does that. Whether you agree with the way they're doing it or not, it does enliven the characters. So,
And
is there?
humanizes it a bit, so it
Yeah, it
looks
really
like real
does.
humans.
Yeah, and you really see that frustration of you don't get it, you don't get it, and I'm
Mhm.
sure we all don't get it either. We get it to the extent that we can get it. Even the idea that there's a divine spark within us, and that we each have a divine spark within us. How many times do we not live that? How many
Mhm.
times do we live that we don't get that? We don't
Right.
get that. Even though we believe it
Right.
or we profess it, we don't completely get it by our actions and by our thoughts,
Oh,
kind of that.
the gap between saying that you get it and actually getting it can be a lifetime or multiple lifetimes. And so
Right,
just the things we think are true, we don't really believe they're true. It's just
right.
like, "Yeah, I get it. Yeah, no, I believe this is true." It's like, well, if you truly believe that was true, you'd probably be able to bilocate or never have to eat food again, or
Right. You'd be an air
move
eater.
through walls. I don't know. Yeah,
Right.
you'd be doing a lot more. And it's like no shame. Like, hey, I'm with you, but I conceptually get it, but I'm not sure I get it. Get it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, we're all babies and toddlers, and some of us are teenagers.
Right.
Yeah, on this whole
Doing the best we
process.
can with what we've got.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm really excited about your church. I know you're very committed to having, butts and seats, that people actually physically being there. Are you going to have any option for people to attend who don't live in the area? And you're in Lee's Summit. Is that where you're going to be, Lee's Summit, Missouri?
Lee Summit, Missouri, right downtown at Bridge Space. I'm in it right now. Got a little space here, and
Oh, nice.
we'll be meeting at Bridge Space. Yeah, so we're working on that. One thing we're trying not to do is overwhelm ourselves, because right now it's my wife, myself, a few other volunteers that are helping out, and the impulse is like, we want to do it all from the get-go. We want to have
Oh,
small
gosh.
groups and outreach and volunteers,
Yep,
and we want to be
yep.
drilling wells, and we want to be helping
I've
these
been there.
communities. And you're like, all right, hold on. Yes, we want to be able to have an online community, but we want to be able to do it the right way. So if those people are coming and the funds are coming to make that happen, absolutely, that's going to happen. But we're not going to try to do everything at once ourselves. If the right people aren't there yet, then wait till they show up to be there. Because I've been the minister who's like got the iPad out and he's moving the camera and he's running over and he's doing the sound and he's juggling the plates, and it's like, oh, get a guitar if you need me. It's like, I'd like to have a team that's helped me. So let's build the team and do it right. That takes some time. Then we'll wait till we have the right people.
Oh my gosh, you're describing the night before I started a church in the Chicago suburb of Deerfield. And the night before, bless their hearts, all three of my daughters were printing and we're folding bulletins, and my older daughter's boyfriend was going to do the music, and my younger daughter helped me with the projector and all the slides and everything. And it was this family thing, and we're playing this rock music, and it was really fun. The problem is I also fell into that. I want to provide everything. I want to be like a thriving church from the beginning. So oh my gosh, it was exhausting. Because the next week it was the same thing. It wasn't like I had 20 people to come and help now. So I learned a lot. When you pioneer a church, you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about your expectations and what's realistic, and having faith and recognizing that the message is what's most important. So many things I learned about myself. I don't think I would have ever learned any other way. But it sounds like you've been in other couple of churches before, and in your CEO position at Unity Worldwide Ministries, you've got a lot more wisdom going into starting this church than perhaps I did.
I've seen a few things, but I mean, you feel that pull. And we've had a lot of people reach out and say, we want to be able to watch you online. You're like, okay, I got to figure out this online thing. And you're like, hold on.
Yeah.
And so we were like, where's the website? Like, you just flip a switch and a website just appears. You're like, it takes weeks to build a website.
Right.
Like, well, you got to start your organization. You got to do like everything you asked me to do is like a months long process, not like, oh, I woke up in the morning, the website was built. That was awesome.
Right. It is, but it's such an interesting process though, because when you have an intention and it is aligned with the Spirit for you, Spirit's intention for you, that things will show up in the right way, in the right order. And that's kind of a whole process of faith. And it's kind of that ego part of us that wants to go over here when maybe it didn't show up there yet. Something is showing up for us here. So, Spirit's leading us here. You know all that. But it really is different when you're starting your own church.
Oh, yeah. It's the ego's like, oh, you can do that. You can also do that. You can do that. Don't be a wimp. You got this. Do that.
And it's particularly difficult if you actually do have talent in lots of different areas.
Right.
Versus if you had really minimal talent, then really I just got to stay in my lane. Everybody else can do it. I've seen very successful ministers start churches where they know their lane is this narrow lane. I can't do anything else. But if you're like, well, I can do the PowerPoint and I can do the sound, and you can do the sound. You've had a whole career in sound.
I can.
You can do all that.
I can juggle it all. I'll sit down and try to figure out how to run the entire show in one laptop. I'll be like, I got this. I'll have it next to me. I'll be typing while I'm speaking. Yeah. So no,
I've
I mean,
done it.
there's such that pull, and I think that's a pull in any ministry is someone shows up, they would like something. And I did it in my ministry. Someone's like, you know what, you should teach this class. You're like, oh, great,
Oh
I'll
yeah.
teach that class. And then they never come. And like you do
Yeah.
that 3 times
Oh
in a row, you're
yes.
like, all
Oh
right,
yeah.
okay. So this is a thing. People ask for something that they themselves won't show up to.
Yeah. That's where I think once again our model is follow me, the Jesus model. And he was very discerning in where he put his energy
Right.
and really, really did follow what spirit, what God was leading him to, and saying no to a lot of other things. And I think people forget that about that whole story. As if he was all
Yeah.
just love and all just loving and helping everyone. He had very clear boundaries.
Yeah.
And yeah, very clear.
Well, you got a whole group of people that are trying to move him into politics. Like, you've got to be
Right.
kidding. And he's like, you lost your minds.
Exactly. Exactly. As opposed to, I could be good at that.
Yeah, I got that too. Sure.
You
Line
know
it
what?
up.
I could overthrow the Romans now that you think about it.
Exactly. So, I mean,
Uh,
we're trying to avoid that process,
yeah.
just waiting for the right people to come in, and they're coming. And you talk about when you're aligned with spirit. I mean, this thing is just flowing. I mean, it is flowing right now, and it really is. Can we even catch up to how quickly this is flowing?
Yeah.
And trying to say we can't get steamrolled by it because it's just happening in
Yeah.
spite of us. But we still need to get the systems in place to support its growth as it's happening. So it's really my wife and I sit down like we just got to prioritize what needs to happen next. Because
Yeah.
some things that are happening that we need to wait for 5 weeks, they're just happening. We can't, there's no stop yet, but we still need the support system to support what's already happening and to be
Right.
able to play. So it's a fascinating work.
Yeah, and you and I are talking about starting a church, but everything we're talking about applies to any project that anybody out there who's
Mhm.
listening is taking on. And when you feel that impulse, when you feel that intuition that this is what I'm going to do next, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is my purpose, and this is what is before me. All of that stuff happens to anybody. It's not just a church. So I'm hoping that people listen to us like, oh, yeah, I see that. I see that I need my boundaries. I see that I need to take care of myself. And I see that I need to allow it to unfold in the right and perfect way, the way that spirit is leading you. And so I think it applies to everyone.
Well, especially in this day and age, I mean, you have so many people starting their own businesses and working from
Yeah.
home and becoming entrepreneurs, and it's this whole process. Like you can't do it all at once. And accepting we're going to do some things wrong
Yeah.
that we wish we had done differently in hindsight. We just have to accept that's part of the process. It's not going to be perfect. We just got to make some decisions, and we'll adjust when we find out it's not working. But for me, I'm super analytical. I'm like, let's get the decision perfect the first time. We need all the data we can possibly gather. And Aaron is like, we need to stop with that. Let's just
It's
come up
always
with a
good to
pretty
have
good
a
decision.
supportive spouse.
Yes, who understands you. She's like, all right,
Yeah.
do a little research, but we got to pull the trigger
Right.
on something this afternoon, or got to know by tomorrow. And so you can
Right.
start just making steps forward and going, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. There's still spirits in charge. It's greater than me. God's
Yeah.
got a plan. I'm just allowing it flow through me. And
I have to be perfect as I have to be perfect. I have to be good. Those are two statements that come back and bite us in the butt a lot of times. So
absolutely.
they're very false. So when you get your website, let me know. I will put it on the show notes because I'm sure everybody would be interested in learning about what you're up to and anything else that you want to share. We are coming up on an hour. I feel like we've barely touched the surface. I am excited about you coming to the retreat again and sharing your wisdom. And I will send you a whole bunch of those forgotten teachings of Charles Fillmore. It's actually called The
Yes.
Forgotten Teachings of Charles Fillmore, How Our Relationship with Animals Connects to Universal Love, Ethical Living, Spiritual Development, and World Peace. And I put this together by spending a lot of time in the archives at Unity Village and
Mhm.
making hundreds of copies of Charles Fillmore's sermons and Unity Magazine and all of that, just kind of consolidating it down to something that's a manageable booklet that can be used for a small class or a small group. But it does kind of tell the history of the Fillmores as you've shared. So let me turn it over to you if there's anything else that you want to share about what you're up to or a message to everyone who's listening or whatever's on your heart.
So, I mean, we have plan to have at least the initial version of the website up today or tomorrow. So it's going to be fillmore.church.
Okay.
And we'll be also starting to get our Facebook page started, which will also be fillmore.church. And so people can start trying to gather people together that are interested, whether they're in the area or they're not in the area. We're working on building volunteer teams for the in-person experience and the online experience so that we can put all that together. And there's people coming in and we're corralling them and figuring out a plan for them. So we are just really looking for prayer. We're looking for people with skill sets to help. People have funds to help fund. Any support would be awesome. It's really, just really feel an excitement around doing this Fillmore work and really focusing on the time frame when the two of them were doing the work together. When Charles and Myrtle were alive and the work they did together, I think there's a special moment in time. The two of them had this union. It was blessed and something magical came out of it. We're going to focus on that time frame when they were both doing the work together, what came out of that, which a lot of it was around, the healing mind, body, and soul and practical Christianity. So we're excited about that. And so just stay tuned. You can reach us on the website or through the Facebook page once it's up and running.
Thank you, Shad. This has been a really fun conversation.
And I'll see you at the retreat. Don't forget the retreat. You can meet me and I'll see you there.
I will. And I really encourage everybody to look into that. It is so fabulous. It's very healing. It's uplifting. It's fun. And it really helps you have a platform in the world for you to go out and do your work. If you're interested in creating a world that works for all beings, if you're interested in what Shad was talking about reinserting ourselves in nature as nature, and what would we create from there? Because I'm not sure we even know, but we are going to be practicing imagination and looking at what would that world possibly be. And then that's the first step in creation. So I'm really glad you're going to be a part of it.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Shad, for joining us. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.